Welcome everyone to just add my welcome to Simon's. We are, as Simon says, continuing our discussion on the variant classification for BRCA and HRR genes today. Simon and myself will be chairing this session, and I have great thanks to our two experts who are joining us today, Emma Howard and Kathleen Klaas. So next slide, please. This is a disclaimer, and the next slide. Thank you. So the aims of the two workshops, just to reiterate why we're having these sessions, was really to provide educational webinar, and that was to promote the accurate classification, as I mentioned, of BRCA1, BRCA2 and other HRR gene variants. So we held our first webinar towards the end of November, whereby our experts went through the resources, the best practice guidance, the documentation and all the databases that are available for our use to provide classification of these variants, and also provided some BRCA1, BRCA2 worked examples, which were taken from the EQA GTACT run 4 EQA that had been delivered. And since then, the results of that EQA have been published. So since the 25th of November, individuals have been able to participate on the online GTACT tool, which was to classify 6 different gene variants and summarize the criteria that was used by each individual. And the aim of today is to go through in detail the evidence used and the classification from the expert panel of these 6 variants, and then we will be able to open a question and answer session. So as Simon mentioned, please do submit your questions into the chat. We will run through all 6 variants in quick succession, and then hold an open Q&A session at the end. So even though you want to comment on variant 1, 2, 3, etc., please pop it in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So the objectives in summary is to give an overview of the classification performed by the participants. Now the EQA scheme has just closed and the data was made available to us yesterday afternoon. So we have a very high level summary to provide to you today, but just to let you know, there will be a subsequent EQA summary report released to all participants, and you'll also have access to your own individual scoring reports, so that will follow. We are also going to outline the expert panel's classification of the same 6 variants, and also ask the experts to answer any questions from the participants going forward. So next slide, please. So this is the overview of the GTACT Run 5 that has been performed over the last 3 weeks. So next slide, please. This is a summary of participation. So despite it being a very quick and short turnaround time, we had 313 participants from over 48 different countries. So you can see here we really do have a wide global spread, although most of the participants do come from the UK. However, it's nice to see we've got participants, as I say, global. A couple of people didn't put their country or their email address wasn't clear where they were located, but thank you for submitting that data. So next slide, please. This is a summary of the 6 variants that were required to be classified. You can see here that we gave a nice spread of BRCA1, BRCA2, and then RAD51C, PALB2, and ATM. So we were covering the remit of the HRR genes. We can see here that we also had a mixture of different variant types. So for example, a missense, deletions, and also splicing. And you can see we included a range of classifications from 2, 3, right up to 4 and 5 pathogenicity variant classification. So next slide, please. This is a snapshot, and as we're discussing the variants, it may change as we may change some of the classifications going forward, but this gives you a summary of the number of participants who correctly classified the variants according to the expected classification. So 6 participants classified all 6 variants correctly, and then you can see here we have a spread of different range of correct classified variants, with only 6 individuals classifying one correctly, correctly, and here we have 43 individuals with no variants classified correctly. However, we are aware that some individuals have logged on and reviewed the process and the information present, but not actually made any submission. So I would expect the majority of these individuals haven't actually submitted any classification, rather than not obtaining a correct classification. So next slide, please. So I'm now handing over to Emma Howard, who is going to run through the first 3 variants and give the evidence of the classification presented today. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, so the first variant is a Bracha One variant at C5117 G2A glycine 1706 glue. Like I said, it's in the BRCA1 gene. It's a missense variant. It's non-synonymous. The prior risk of pathogenicity is unknown, and it's in the BRCT domain of BRCA1. Next slide, please. And this is just a summary overview from the different databases and resources that we would automatically evaluate when we're doing the UV assessment. So first of all, BRCA share. It wasn't reviewed. It was the likely outcome of that was likely causal. On NOMAD, it was a low percentage. On BRCA exchange, it was yes as pathogenic. It was on ClinVar as likely pathogenic and pathogenic. So there's a mixture on there. The in silico algorithms suggested that it was deleterious. And the other bioinformatic findings, just to say that in line obviously with the BRCA exchange, Enigma classified this as pathogenic. Next slide, please. And so this is the overview, and this is a particularly tricky variant, and that's why it was chosen, because I think it emphasises some key points of the subjectiveness of some of the guidance still. And you're probably asked to use the ACMG guidance in order to classify your variant, and some of it can be still quite subjective. There is other classification guidances out there now, such as the ACGS, and they've been updated quite regularly over the past 3 years. And also just recently, we've got the CanVig guidance, which is far more cancer susceptibility gene specific. So if I just walk you through why I've chosen these, and I'll just talk around them. So first of all, PM1 is in a hotspot domain, and because it's in the BRCT domain, which is a very highly functional domain in BRCA and well documented with functional assays, was able to apply a moderate piece of evidence there. Like I said on the previous slide, the in silico evidence was supportive of it all being deleterious, so we could apply a supporting piece of evidence there. Interrogation of ClinVar and LOVD showed that the prevalence of the variant in affected individuals is significantly increased compared to the prevalence in controls. So I applied PS4 moderate there. If you look at the ACGS guidance, they say that if you can apply a moderate piece of evidence if it's in 2 or more, including your own, so your own proband, and then 2 additional unrelated individuals, this can be then selected as moderate. It was on very low on NOMAD, so we could apply a moderate piece of evidence there. And this, I suppose, is the more subjective piece of evidence, applying the functional criteria. And if you look at ACGM, they actually do really recommend that it's a robust assay, and this one is one of the most robust assays. It's one that is a credible assay, a transcription assay, that they looked at yeast and they looked at it in this particular variant in mammalian cells. But they also say that it needs to be repeatable as well. And because this was a standalone assay just by one group, one needs to perhaps be a little bit more reserved and not apply it in the strong setting. Although ACGM it doesn't stipulate, and it just leaves it to the individual. ACGS does allow you in some way to select either supporting, moderate or strong for this, but again it does say that in order for it to be applied as strong, you need to have at least 2 independent laboratories that replicate the assay. And that wasn't the case in this. So I did go for the more reserved supporting evidence for PS3. But I do understand if people did use that in the strong setting, as the ACMG guidance would appear to allow. So I don't think that anybody should be marked down for that. And I've spoke with the team before and said, actually, class 4 or 5 for this particular variant for me would fit. We also, as an assessor, tried to be consistent with our approach previously in the Run 4, and this is how we approached that particular piece of evidence around a functional assay then, and so wanted to keep consistency there. However, I will say that, you know, some labs have used PP5, and I just wanted to comment on that because I'm sure there'll be some questions around it. ACMG don't recommend the use of PP5. Neither do the ACGS, although there's some exceptions for some cancer genes, but CanVig do allow it only in the supporting setting. Personally, I'm not opposed to it. We just tried to, because from Run 4, PP5, we made a decision as assessors that we shouldn't use it if we were using ACMG, and that's why I've not used it here. However, I would only ever use it in the supporting setting. And the reason behind that is because I know that some people think that if Enigma has classified it, that it sort of trumps the other evidence that's acquired. However, more recently, Enigma have agreed to go back through and review some of their variants that are listed as pathogenic, because two of them, a couple of them have been recently downgraded with new functional evidence. So it's just, I think personally that a supporting piece of evidence, if you're going to use PP5, is appropriate. So just to summarise, there was no evidence favouring benign variants, and the overall evidence I had was PM1 moderate, PP3 supporting, PS4 moderate, PM2 moderate, and PS3 supporting, which gave a prediction of class 4 likely pathogenic. Next slide, please. And therefore, this is the summary of the participant classifications, and you can see the majority went for a class 5, and like I said, I can understand that, and looking at the breakdown, it's likely that some people have used it as a PS3 in the strong setting, which then would bump that classification up to a 5, but people have also used PP5 in not only in supporting some moderate and some very strong, which I would disagree with the use of PP5 in a very strong criteria. So you can see that 146 went for pathogenic class and 47 likely pathogenic, but overall, this would not change clinical management for the patient. And that is key here. You're going to always have guidance that is subjective, and people will apply different elements of it in different ways. But as long as the overall management of the patient isn't affected and the treatment options for those BRCA or ovarian patients, then that is the most important take-home message. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So classification of the variant 2. Next slide. So this was a BRCA 1 C.105.115 del. This is which introduces a stop at codon 36, and there was no unknown risk of pathogenicity prior. Okay, the next slide, please. So the overall summary: it wasn't on BRCA Share, it wasn't on Nomad, it wasn't on BRCA Exchange. It's on ClinVar as uncertain. The in silico assays are not applicable in this setting, and there was no other findings. Next slide, please. So the summary in this one, which I applied PVS1 very strong because a null variant in gene where loss of function is a known mechanism of disease, and PM2 because it was absent or very low in controls in population databases. There was no evidence of it being a benign variant, and therefore this comes out of PVS1 very strong, PM2 moderate, prediction is class 5. And next slide, please. So we see here predominantly 123 participants have gone for class 5, 68 have gone for likely pathogenic class 4, and only 6 have gone for the uncertain. So and 42 have not assigned it. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the third variant and the final one in the BRCA series. So this is BRCA 2, 1460C2A, ALA 487 GLU. And this is a missense, again, non-synonymous. Prior risk of pathogenicity is unknown. Next slide, please. So the overall summary was it was on BRCA Share, present in 1 pathogenic BRCA 2 variant and 1 BRCA 1 pathogenic variant as likely benign. It's on Nomad at 0.015% in Europeans. It's not on BRCA Exchange. It's on ClinVar as benign, likely benign, and uncertain. and it's predicted benign using the in silico algorithms. Next slide, please. So overall, the summary of this evidence favouring a benign variant, BS1, as it was higher than predicted in the non-cancer European population. So the prevalence of it in that group was high, so we could apply benign piece of evidence there. And then BP4, because all the multiple lines of computational evidence supported it being non-deleterious effect, which came out as BS1 strong, BP4 supporting, prediction class 2, which is likely benign. And the next slide, please. And so the overall summary of the participants' classifications illustrate that 121 individuals, participants went for the likely benign class 2, 66 went for uncertain, and 7 went for benign, and 44 were not assigned. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand you over to Kathleen now, who will take you through the remaining variants.
Thank you, Emma. So for the next variant in the RAD51C gene, it's a 414G2C, and it leads to an amino acid change. A leucine at position 138 is changed into a phenylalanine. It's a missense variant, and the prior risk of pathogenesis is known. It's located in a protein, functional domain involved in DNA recombination, protein REC-A-like domain, and the ATP binding domain. Next slide, please. It can be found in different databases. So for the RAD51C and also the other variants, the other genes I'm going to discuss, BRCA exchange does not have data for that. So therefore, we need to consult the more general databases like ClinVar, LOVD. In ClinVar, it's reported by the majority of the submitters as likely pathogenic. In LOVD as that it affects function, but in none of both databases, the variant was already reviewed by an expert panel. In GNOMAT, one allele can be found, and then I show some prediction programs. So in Revel, it indicates a value of 0.592, which is just, well, which is under the cutoff of 0.7 to use it as an to use the right parameter. Fifth polyphen, it's indicates that it's deleterious, and align GVGB indicates that C15. So it's also down the C35 cutoff. Next, please. Then in the literature, several publications have described the variants, and in some publications you could find pedigrees to evaluate co-segregation with the disease in multiple affected family members. So here you see two pedigrees from two different publications. The first one is the Nature Genetics paper who published RAD51C as a human cancer susceptibility gene, associated mainly with a risk for ovarian cancer. You see they have also identified it in a person with bilateral breast cancer. They indicated that in the tumors of these patients, a loss of heterozygosity was observed. Then in the next pedigree, you also see several patients with the variant, although also here the phenotype is not only ovarian cancer, you also see several cases with breast cancer. So that makes it more complicated to, well, what phenotype do you expect with people with RAD51C, only ovarian cancer? There are also suggestions that there is an association with breast cancer, but the link is it's still a bit less clear. Next, please. Another approach that we like to evaluate are the functional assays. This variant has been evaluated by in three different publications. So the first one is done in chicken cells where the RAD51C was knocked out, and where with the retroviral vector RAD51C was introduced, and then they evaluated the effects by exposing the cells to mitomycin C. And with purple, you see that this variant, that there clearly is an effect visible for this variant compared to the wild type donors or to the vector controls. Similar approach, but in another kind of cell line, that was applied by the group of Ana Osorio, published in Human Molecular Genetics. You also see the variant in purple, that there is a clear reduction, and there they evaluated RAD51 foci. And then there is from an Indian group, they also evaluated in hamster cells the variants, and also they have shown a clear effect in the different assays they have applied and different sensitivities to cisplatin and other DNA damaging agents. So in this sense, we can use the PS3 for the functional assay. However, to determine if you can use it as a strong or moderate element, that's a bit difficult, because the ACGS guidelines tell you that to make it strong, they should use at least 10 positive and 10 negative controls. And there should be different labs. Here you have 3 labs, but as there are not so many known pathogenic controls, none of them applied sufficient controls to fall into the strong category. Next, please. So to summarize, we found that there are mainly, well, in PS4 moderate, there was only one allele in GNOMAT, while the prevalence in affected individuals is increased compared with the prevalence in controls. This fulfills the criteria. For the functional assays, 3 labs published functional assays and showed a damaging effect. However, as they do not fulfill the criteria to make it as a strong argument, I've put moderate, but this can be, yeah, well, some people might disagree on that. Then close segregation with disease in multiple affected family members, together with loss of heterozygosity in many tumors. That's why I applied PP1 and strong. In silico predictions were all hinting towards supporting of deleterious effect, and then the very low absence in the GNOMAT. Yeah, in this, then BP1, you can use it or not. It's just like, well, in this gene, the mutation spectrum is less well known than for the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes. The majority of the variants that have been classified as pathogenic in LOVD and ClinVar are clearly truncating variants. However, there are a few missense variants. So some people may think that BP1 can be applied. Some of the people, and maybe we can go to the next slide, where you see the results. So the majority of the applicants classified the variant as likely pathogenic, just like we did. However, there is also a large number of people who classify this as pathogenic. They used specific criteria to come, so they used the PS1, and PS1 is the criterion that says that you can classify a missense variant as pathogenic if previously another change at the same amino acid has been indicated to be pathogenic. However, in this case, I think you cannot apply it because, to my opinion, to my knowledge, there is only one variant located at this amino acids that has been described as pathogenic, and that's just the one that we are presenting here. And then some people also applied PP2 as a gene with a low rate of missense variants, meaning it's a criterion to say that it's a gene with a low rate of missense variants. That's correct. However, yeah, as I said before, the mutation spectrum is less well known than for other genes. And there are already a few missense variants classified as pathogenic. That's why I would not advise to use PP2. Slide, please. Then for variant 5, it's a variant in PALB2, again, a missense variant, a C.2506 G2A, and it changes the valine at position 836 to an isoleucine. Also located in a RAD50 in the functional domain, the RAD51 binding domain and BRCA domain, and the prior risk of pathogenicity is unknown. Next slide, please. For this variant, also there is not a BRCA share available, so we have to look in ClinVar, where there is conflicting interpretations going from VUS to likely benign. In LOVD, it's also classified as VUS. It's a bit more frequent than the RAD51C variant. It has 3 alleles in GNOMAT. The in silico prediction programs all points towards benign or tolerated variants. I did not find any publications on the variant. I did not find find functional assays published for this particular variant. For PALB2, the literature is more limited than for BRCA1 and 2 anyway. Next slide, please. So coming to this summary, the evidence for favoring a pathogenic variant, the PM2 is low. It has a low frequency in controls in population databases. It's 3 alleles in GNOMAT. But there was also evidence favoring it being a benign variant because here I dare to apply BP1. A missense variant in a gene for which primarily truncating variants are known to cause disease. The current evidence for missense variants being pathogenic in PALB2 is very, there is not much evidence. There are not much publications about that. I'm sure functional assays might change our view. And that's also what Emma indicated. There is, well, things are moving. So, we have to be very alert that our knowledge is increasing gradually and that regular revision of some variants might be indicated. And then we also applied BP4 because computational evidence says there is no impact. So because of these different parameters, I would classify it as a class 3. So was happy to see that many of the participants agreed with class 3. So many of you also classified it as a class 3 variant and some as a likely benign variant. Next, please. Then for variant 6, it's in the ATM gene. It's a splice variant, 898 plus 2T2 gene, 2G, sorry. It's a splice site. Prior risk of pathogenicity is unknown. Next slide. In ClinVar, it has been submitted by several labs and classified as likely pathogenic. Also in LOVD, it's written as a variant that affects function. Has been found in GNOMAT 1 allele, while it has been described in the literature in many different patients with ataxia telangiectasia. So they are compound heterozygous for 2 variants in ATM and also in breast cancer patients has also been reported. The different splice prediction programs and the favorites ones are listed here, Max and Scan and Splice Site Finder Like, they both indicated complete abrogation of the wild type donor sites. Next slide, please. So to summarize, I applied PSV very strong for this variant because it's a splice variant, a null variant in a gene where loss of function is a known mechanism of disease. Going to the literature, learned that the different, it has been published regularly in patients with a clear AT phenotype. So in this sense, and they also have done some functional testing in cell lines with these variants, indicating that protein kinase activity is hampered. PM2, it has a low frequency in controls in population databases, so it's only one allele in GNOMAD. All the splice prediction program supports deleterious effect, and it's much more frequent in affected individuals, both AT patients as well as breast cancer patients, compared to the prevalence in controls like in GNOMAD. So based on these characteristics, I would classify it as a class 5. Next, please. So what you see here is that many of the participants agreed with this classification, and a smaller group classified it as likely pathogenic, although the clinical impact is similar. Well, I think here there is sufficient evidence to go for a class 5 variant. Next, please. So I think I hand over the word now again to Sandra to discuss the outcome of the global scheme.
Thank you, Kathleen, very much. And thank you, everyone. We're being inundated with questions, which is fantastic. So thank you for that. So as with previous variant classification runs, we have displayed the data submitted by the participants through these bubble plots. So we have quickly put this one together. Obviously, if we're changing some of the classifications, this will change accordingly. But here you can see a summary of the range of classifications submitted for each variant by the participants. So here the larger the bubble means the more increased number of people who classified that variant. So along the bottom we have variants 1 to 6, and then on the y-axis we have the classification that goes from 5 pathogenic right down to 1 which is benign. So what we're looking for variant 1 here is the expected classification was a 4, and as Emma has described and given the evidence required, we can see the 4 has got a smaller number of people classifying that variant, whereby the majority classified as 5, and Emma's eloquently explained that difference. For variant 2, again, we see a split between pathogenic and likely pathogenic, but I think clinically that is acceptable because it would not change clinical management. And we see a wider spread for variant 3, whereby the majority of participants did classify it as expected, which is likely benign as a class 2, but again, we do have a spread. And also there's a small number who had classified that variant as a 4, which is likely pathogenic, and that would actually have an impact on the clinical management of that individual. Again, we see a slight spread for variant 4, the majority of participants classifying it as expected, which was likely pathogenic, but again, some erring on the side of caution with a class 3, which again may put in doubt clinical management and change in management there. Variant 5 is the closest to having standardization, whereby real majority of individuals classified it as expected as a UV variant, with a smaller number classifying it as a 2. And again, we've got quite a close cluster on variant 6, whereby most individuals classified it as pathogenic. So I think very clear here that we're seeing across the runs that we have provided over the years, that we're getting larger bubbles, which is great. We can see consistency and a much smaller spread. The initial BRCA runs did see classifications running from 1 right through to 5 for each variant, which was very concerning. So I think participation ongoing in these types of EQAs demonstrate that we are moving towards standardization, but I think there's still some way to go, particularly when it is so subjective. And we've just heard here from our expert panels that there's a real need to keep up to date. Don't assume classifications are not going to change. There's always new evidence being available, and this should be taken into account for each case as you go forward. So next slide, please. We're now going to open the question and answer session. So hopefully we'll be able to get through quite a few questions, but bearing in mind that there are many, so we may not be able to cover your own. Simon has requested also, if you're putting a question in that's linked to a particular variant, can you just point us in that direction? Because I think there's a smattering of general queries coming in as well. So I'm going to kick off with Emma. Can I come to you, because you were our first few variants, and we've got a couple of queries about variant 1, as we were expecting, because it was very challenging. So the first question is the BRCA1 BRCT domain has some benign variation, so should it be classed as PM1 supplementary?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. I think in BRCA, it's one of the most hotspot locations in BRCA1, and it does have some benign, but mostly, there's a lot of evidence out there on functional work in functional papers that demonstrate, particularly within that region where our variant sits, that protein modelling, etc., shows that it is a hotspot variant. If we were sticking to the letter of the law, perhaps, but again, it comes to judgment, doesn't it, and experience with the variants within that particular region adjacent to the variant that we're discussing today. And I did go with moderate. Now, I accept that some people may go with supplementary, and that these are the slight differences between local arrangements that people have in place around the guidance.
Okay, thank you, Emma. That's really helpful. So sticking with variant 1, the second question is, so why only PS3 supporting? And the individual has said that there's many functional assays published, and actually given a list of a few publications that are available. Okay. Do you want to comment on that one, please?
So I'm aware of some of them, but not all of them. I will say that but I did say this, that, this is the one where, I've been probably more reserved, and I would absolutely appreciate that you could apply moderate or strong. I looked at the reduction compared to the wild type in yeast, and it doesn't actually stipulate, although they said the criteria for making it deleterious was under 40%, on the paper that I mentioned, it doesn't actually say that particular variant, what percentage it went down to. And if you look at CanVig, they actually asked for under 25% of the wild type in mammalian cells. So I was a little bit more reserved about that, because that paper that I mentioned didn't say for that. And also it's being consistent across functional assays as well. This was a transcription assay, and some of the others aren't. Some are genome saturation, and therefore, as this particular assay, but I accept that if there was a saturation assay, which is now a credible assay, but not all assays, if you look at CanVig and ACGS, are listed. So some of the functional ones may not be as credible as others, and you've just got to read in a lot of depth. And like I said, I think that you could apply from strong to supporting with PS3 in this setting, and it's not wrong.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I think just examples of how it is subjective at times of where you classify.
Yeah, and it depends how much emphasis you put on certain weights of some functional work over the others. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then I've got a final question for you here for this part. So according to ACMG 2015, PVS1 and PM2, is it a likely pathogenic variant, not pathogenic?
Yeah, and I accept that. So an ACMG, it is likely pathogenic, but then the updated table for ACGS, which the UK labs use, would put that at pathogenic. So that's where the differences come through there. So I accept that. Yes, quite right. And thank you for calling me out on that.
Thank you, Emma, very much. Simon, I'll hand over to you for a few questions, please.
Yep, thank you, Sandy. So I'm going to be asking a few questions for Kathleen. So we're going to kick off with a couple of nice sort of general ones. So Kathleen, the first question is, how do you determine using PM2? What is the limit of very low?
Well, very low means a small number in GNOMAT. So if you have a 0 in more than 50,000 controls, which GNOMAT contains more than 50,000 controls, you can use it as a moderate. Then a supporting is a 1 in more than 50,000 controls. Is that if I'm supporting is if it's in more than 1 of 50,000 controls.
So pretty low, basically.
Very pretty low.
Yes.
So the that I discussed here were 1, 2 alleles.
And to follow that up, Kathleen, so another general question about use of rules, if you like. What are the criteria considered to use the BP1 rule?
Well, BP1 says that more than BP1 means that the majority of the variants are truncating. What's the majority? More than 95% of the variants are truncating variants and considered as pathogenic. But as I said, for some genes, mutation spectra are very well known. You have a lot of variants, so 95% means in concrete numbers a large number of variants. While for RAD51C, if you analyze the databases, it's only a limited number of limited number of variants that are known until now. So that's why I was a bit more cautious in that case there. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, Kathleen, again, it's general, I suppose, but we'll according to the ACMG 2015 guidelines, so PVS1 and PM2 is likely pathogenic variant, not pathogenic.
Yes, I don't know by heart. I always forget about how many we need. So you mean one PVS. And one
PVS1 and PM2.
PM2, according to the new ACMG guidelines.
Yes, this ACMG 2015 guidelines.
Yeah, I think that's the case, but I don't know by heart. ACGS, they might ask some more criteria. I don't know if Emma knows it by heart.
I think Emma might have covered that actually.
Sorry, I did cover it, and the difference is the new ACGS. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Kathleen, another question for you. I'm just scrolling down the very long list that we have from our participants, which is great. So thank you very much indeed. So for case, so this is really aimed at some of the case-specific information, Kathleen. So for case 4, PS3 and PS4 gives a classification of 5P according to the ACMG guidelines. Which guidelines did you use here?
Wait, PS3 and?
PS3 and PS4 gives a classification of 5P.
Well, I checked for ACGS and I just did not reach the cutoff to come to pathogenic.
So
that's why
five pathogenic, right?
Yeah. So
again, I think it highlights this. Again, there's this subjectivity, isn't there, about exactly how you interpret these, and it needs a level of expertise and interpretation. Nothing is completely fixed. Most of these variants.
That's what I wanted to indicate with discussing the functional assays. You need so many controls, but you have several labs done the same, but there are not so many controls. So in which category can you put it? Same with segregation. Yeah, is it strong enough to put it in strong or moderate or supporting? Yeah, it's a bit dependent on which phenotype you consider as the phenotype associated with that gene.
Okay, and one last one, which is for you, which is relating to the ATM variant. Is it so again, case specifically, like I think this is case 6, isn't it? The ATM variant.
That was the last one.
Is it accurate to use PVS1 and PP3 in combination?
So PVS1 is a null variant, and PP3 is the predictive prediction programs. I can see, yeah, that's, of course, this is a bit overlapping information. However, I think in this, in this case, there are more arguments than that alone. So but generally spoken, it's not wise to add up both parameters. But I agree. I used it here to make clear that it's an that prediction programs clearly show loss of the donor site, and it's a +1 or a +2 variant. So indeed, it falls already immediately in PVS1.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Kathleen. I think I'll hand back to Sandy for a few more questions for Emma by the looks of it.
Great, thank you both very much. Yes, Emma, so you'll be very pleased to know we've got 2 questions on variant 1 that have come in as well, so bear with us. So first of all, for variant 1, why not use PP1 strong for BRCA 1 variant?
Let me remind myself.
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Yeah, sorry, just bear with me. So that's co-segregation, PP1. With multiple affected family members, was that for variant 1, did you say?
Yes, variant 1, so the 5117 G to A.
Okay, no, I didn't apply that because I didn't see an extensive pedigree with multiple affected family members, and it's not some information we had locally.
Okay.
This is PP1 is about co-segregation in multiple affected family members.
So not relevant really for the information that had been supplied with that variant.
I didn't have that information. I did search the literature and I didn't see it. So
okay, great, thank you. And I guess on the GTAC system that information wasn't present either, so you wouldn't be expecting that to be applied.
No, but like I say, people in local settings might have that information if they've done segregation through their families, you know, and then that piece of evidence could be applied there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks, Emma. And a second question on variant 1, why is PM5 moderate not used since it's in the same codon with that's linked to another pathogenic missense variant?
PM5.
So PM5. So the individual says that it's linked to another pathogenic missense variant and the mutations within the same codon, or the change is in the same codon.
Yeah, I may have missed that one. I need to look into it. I can come back to that if that's okay, because I need to look into it and I'll note that. So
we could maybe address that in the scheme report, the QA report, Emma, is that fair to say? Great, thank you. Well, okay, Simon, are there any other questions you want to pick up?
Yep, I've got another question. I think it's relating to case 4, which I think is for Kathleen. I think it was RAD51C, case 4, I think it was. So the question is, Kathleen, why not use PM1 for RAD51C, the C414C to G to C in case 4?
So PM1 means that it's located in a mutational hotspot or a well-established functional domain. Yeah, to be honest, I'm always a bit careful with that. Because these functional domains, they not always have very strict boundaries, and also what we do not exactly know if this is the function that is associated with the cancer risk. So
it didn't work at the first hurdle. So
generally for the tumor suppressive genes, DNA repair genes, I do not apply the.
It's just stopping at the first stage.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. We're just triaging a few more questions. Quite a lot of general questions coming through, and questions that would be probably easier for us to pick up in a general feedback to the participants. Kathy, Sandy, do you have anything? Any other questions you'd like to ask?
I think you're right. I think you're right there, Simon, that a lot of them are
good. It's
very general. Sorry, can
here,
people go on mute, please?
general.
We're
Sorry,
getting
can
quite
people
a lot
go on
of feedback. Thank you.
Yeah.
And a couple of I think for general things, perhaps we could do a written feedback as a section in the EQA summary report rather than try and pick up. I think we need to just to do a bit of teasing out if some of the questions are linked to a particular variant, but we can definitely try and include most of that into the EQA summary report.
I think that would be a very good idea, because I think a lot of these questions are quite tricky to answer without having the evidence in front of you to be able to access it. So I think we could do a better, we could provide the more comprehensive feedback to the participants by actually summarising it at the end in the report.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree.
Now, it's very difficult for you guys to be able to do this on spec, and the questions are great, they're probing, and that's what we want. But in some cases, I think it's often better just to sit back and feed it back afterwards when we had time to consider all the cases.
Yeah, so I think it just emphasises the amount of interest and education that everyone wants to be involved in and keep up to date of how we go about classifying these variants. So I would say that the 2 webinars have been extremely helpful. I've definitely learned a lot, if not just to say keep classifying, because things do change and it's quite astounding how quickly things do change. So I just, from behalf of myself and Simon, a huge thank you to both our Kathleen and Emma for taking the time and sharing all this information and a lot of work to classify the variants, and also to the participants who have completed run 5. Please do go back onto the website. You'll be able to download your participation certificate and your own individual laboratory report for the classification, and early in the new year we'll be able to release an EQA summary report that has the feedback comments from the assessors on each variant, and also hopefully we'll be able to clarify all the questions that have been submitted today. Simon, do you want to add anything?
No, just to reiterate my thanks to both, obviously Kathleen and Emma, because they've done a fantastic job of both of these webinars in the variants, etc. And also to thank you and AstraZeneca for the funding as well, and to you, mainly the participants, the 161 who've dialed in today, to thank you for your time and to listening to our webinars. As Sandy said, I hope it's been educational for you, and we look forward to getting your feedback afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you.